can sort of commence certainly when you're ready.
Sorry, it's asking me to agree a privacy policy. Oh, God. Oh, hello?
Yep, you're still here.
Hey, I'm having awful. I do apologize. This is awful. Right, can anybody tell me how I can see everybody on screen?
If you click on your top right bar, there should be a People's. It should say People.
Yeah.
What happens if you click on that?
I get Audrey and a lot of initials. Never mind. We'll continue as we can. Graham, if I go off at tangents and I just get too desperate, I'll ask you to take over. But at the moment, I'll do the best I can. Okay. Welcome everybody. I'm sorry about my lack of technical prowess in Teams. I'm very used to other things. Teams I haven't used very often. Anyway, welcome to everybody. I'm sorry that was a very shaky start. Bruce and Nicola, has anything to say about membership and membership update?
Nothing specific at this point, Colin.
Okay.
We are a couple of members down, and we will be going out. Now school's back in place to try to refill those posts sort of in advance of the next meeting in November.
Okay.
Again, following with regards to teachers moving on, such as Ben Ryder leaving Berwick Middle. So we'll be seeking representatives and seeking in advance of the November meeting.
That's fine. Okay. Well, can I say welcome to Nicola Turnbull, who's acting as clerk, and best of luck. Apologies for absence.
Good morning, Chair and everybody else. We've got apologies for absence for Mike Dean Hall. Okay. I think Harry Hodgson has arrived. I've got Guy Renner Thompson, Richard Wearmouth, and Sam Barron. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, that's smashing. That's all noted.
We should record also Faye Hartland has reserved apologies. She was going to struggle to get here with the revised start time, so it may be Faye is unable to join us. Faye Hartland from Kielder.
Right. Disclosures of interest, anyone? Okay, I'm going to plough on, and can I say at this stage that I'm supposed to be at another meeting at 11:30, so that's my aim at closing. I don't want that to influence the discussion because I've told them that I will stay in this meeting as long as I need to. But having looked at the agenda, I'm hoping that this is more of a reporting meeting and relatively straightforward. So let's go on. Minutes and matters arising. Can we take them both at the same time? Going through the minutes in page 1, and my thanks again for Graham Wilkins for chairing that. I was away at the time of that meeting. Thanks, Graham. Page 1, any comments? Page 2. Page 3, there was obviously a very interesting presentation. I'm sorry I missed that. Audrey, I don't suppose as you particularly want to get embroiled in that, but is there anything big that you want to comment on there that might have changed in the interim? Sorry, I'm putting you on the spot. No, that's fine.
No change, Colin.
Sorry,
just one thing. At the end of the presentation from the High Knees, Nicola, I actually, on behalf of the forum, thank Nicola for her excellent work she done within the county before moving on, right? So that wasn't recorded, so I think it should be recorded as well, right?
I do agree.
I know I got the benefit because she joined my trust.
Yes, you're fortunate. As it happens, I did actually write to Nicola separately, and certainly we do wish her all the best and delight that she's still within the authority. Thanks for that, Graham. Okay, rest of page 4, DSG outturn is as it is. Balances on page 6 and into page 7, and that's the end of it. Any further comments on that?
True record, Chair.
Good, thank you. Moving on then, item 5, communications. Bruce, do you want to say anything particular about the F40, which is a very extensive, and when you read it, a very, very interesting reply on this consultation?
I thought it was helpful just to circulate the F40 response we received a week or two ago, which had gone back in relation to the latest round of National Funding Formula consultation. I think for a couple of things, it shows really that we're getting involved very much in some of the minutiae around the National Funding Formula now, and I just thought it was helpful to sort of set a little bit of context before the sort of subsequent report looking at formula values or potential formula values for 23-24. If I share my screen briefly and just fly through the paper, it may help. Again, some of the headlines around fairness, simplicity and transparency will be familiar with. Asking about whether or not there should be still an opportunity to seek transfers from the mainstream schools block to local education, from mainstream schools to local education budgets. I'm not sure that actually that's the best way of phrasing that question, but because there is clearly still flexibility to transfer between blocks with the agreement of the schools forum. We have done that in the past. We have reduced significantly the transfer we've sought from the schools block to the high needs block because of the high numbers of students going into high needs funding. But whether or not they should, obviously the Formula 40's view was they should still retain that flexibility in the new system. Interestingly, in terms of question 2, do you agree that the direct national funding formula should include an indicative SEND budget set nationally rather than locally? That, of course, refers to the notional SEN budget. Members will recall that we amended our notional SEN budget this year to make it more meaningful to schools and essentially to reduce the threshold by which schools could qualify for additional SEN support, not on a student-by-student basis, but for the most inclusive schools. We've paid one term's funding in relation to that now and have funded, again from memory, approximately a further 30 schools over and above the core 10 we directed funding to previously. The response is very much no, but I think we would like to see guidance from the ESFA in relation to the notional funding budget, but it shouldn't necessarily be prescriptive, would be probably our local view. There then was a whole raft of questions on growth and falling rules fund and how they should operate. I'm not going to dwell on those unless there are any specific questions, but again, that was obviously one key part of the consultation. The other element within there was, of course, dealing with some of those exceptional factors and split sites, which again are a necessary part of the funding formula, I would argue. There is a case which the schools forum has debated and agreed before there. A school is operating on 2 sites. Again, there are additional costs arising from that, and the figure arises in terms of there's criteria raised in the consultation and also a guidance around what the proposal for a figure should be. Last but not least, again, exceptional circumstances. And again, schools forum members are reminded that we do have a couple of schools in the county who are paid funding under an exceptional circumstances criteria currently. That was ratified for 22-23. In that instance, it was around rental costs being in excess of 1% of their DSG totals. Final point.
Sorry, but the total amount, Bruce, is very small in the great scheme of things.
It's out of 200 million plus. It's £21,000 across the county. It's significant to the 2 small schools involved, but not as a not from the point of view of the total DSG, and that case gets built in as an exceptional premises factor anyway. Yeah.
Okay.
Then it plays that in terms of minimum funding guarantee, it again will continue. It's been around in a number of forms even prior to the implementation of national funding formula, but it does appear that that is going to continue to be a factor under national funding formula anyway. Again, the idea about whether you'd rather get a notional allocation or a calculator tool, I'm sure there are other things the ESFA could do to support schools and budget planning, but I mean, I think the key thing at the moment is almost in terms of flexible budgeting, trying to forecast, you know, potential both from an income side around pupil numbers and then on an expenditure side around, you know, sort of pay and price, wage inflation as well. Okay. Again, that was really circulated for members' background information. Happy to pick up any questions or queries in relation to that before we move on to the main paper.
I think the main paper is the key, Bruce. So I think you can go straight into that if you would.
Okay, I presume everybody has sight or can certainly see the paper. Again, just again to remind members in terms of the cycle we're working through around this time of the year, around funding for 23-24. Essentially in September, we'll bring a paper outlining the ESFA communications over the course of the summer, most notably confirming what their indicative national funding formula values are going to be for the subsequent year. Clearly that's in the paper. In November, we'll bring a formal consultation paper to Schools Forum about how we should be setting our budget for 23-24. We'll then subsequently go to consultation with schools in December in relation to that, and then have the budget setting meetings at a broad level in January and a more detailed level in relation to, for example, the high needs DSG in February. So that's where this paper fits into things. Again, background, just setting a little bit of context. I think most, if not all of us, should be familiar with that by now. Interesting to see that the ESFA have introduced these three-tiered assessment criteria. Tier A, local authorities that mirror, to use their terminology, the NFF, i.e. where all formula factors are within 2.5% of the NFF. B, local authorities that mirror NFF in most factors. Northumberland falls within that category. Ironically, not all of our, with one exception, all of our factors actually exactly mirror NFF. They're not within 2.5% of it. The one exception to that is mobility, which we introduced into the funding formula for 22-23 as part of the final steps of transition towards national funding formula. As we've done elsewhere, we introduced it at 50% of the formula value, and technically that's clearly where that's why we fit into band B at the moment. Again, as a reminder, the mobility factor probably distributes out of the 200 million plus, probably distributes around £40,000. So it's not particularly influential in the grand scheme of things. Okay. Because nevertheless, one of the directions or one of the directives the ESFA are introducing for 23-4 is that we will be compelled to move at least 10% closer to national funding formula values for those which don't meet their criteria at the moment. They've published a whole raft of tables in relation to that, but in practice, the only issue for us is in relation to the mobility element, which is highlighted in yellow on page 38 of your agenda pack. We are therefore directed to move to either sort of somewhere between 52920 and 96863 for mobility. In practice, again, subject to affordability, we'll simply be moving to £945, which is the proposed formula value for this year. Okay. Again, important messages in this point, which we need to emphasise. Overall, school funding is increasing by 1.9%. We highlight that the core factors are increasing by 2.4%. National Formula Value. Much of the message in a lot of the publications from the ESFA over the course of the summer, and in a couple of the webinars I've attended in September, has been, you need to remember that you received additional funding during 22-23, both in relation to the schools block and the high needs block. It's evident in the figures that figures aren't going to go up by as much as they did for 22-23, and that's being heavily emphasised in all of the messages we're getting from the ESFA in relation to that. Again, what they're talking about there is 7.9% per pupil increases compared to 21-22. But again, as I've said, a lot of that has been weighted within the current year, and we can't budget for the same level of increases in 23-24. They are targeting more funding at Adaki and free school meals 6 factors. What I should also say at this point, when we're looking at the formula funding factors in the tables, both within the report and in the appendices, so all members will be aware that the school supplementary grant, both to schools and in relation to high needs, that were paid in 22-23 as a separate grant because they were introduced too late for legislation. And essentially were to help support schools with the additional costs arising from the 1.5% health and social care national insurance levy while it was in place, and also the additional inflationary costs around energy at the time, again, when this funding was introduced in January, February this year. That has now been rolled into the overall formula values for 23-24. Some highlights, again, headlined on page 39. An explanation also of the minimum per pupil funding figure. That has increased essentially only by 0.5% after the school supplementary grant is taken into consideration. Apologies as well. I have to point out that a couple of those figures in that table are incorrect. The maths and the calculation are correct, but I've simply deleted the wrong column to finish. The primary figure for 23-24 should be £4,405, and the key stage 4 figure should be £6,033. And my thanks to Graham and his FD for assisting with that one, Graham Atkins. Okay. We've included the ESVA national funding formula values in the appendices. We'll pick those up subsequently, together with potential values and what it means for Northumberland there. Again, high needs, again, demonstrates while there is a 6.3% increase, it is down on previous years' increases when SSG is reflected in the overall totals as well. The ESFA have indicated there will be an increase of between 5 and 7% per head based on sort of population between 2 and 18. For Northumberland, that could be anywhere between 2.1 million and 3 million, or just over 3 million. But obviously, we're waiting for final allocations of that. Central School Services block, that's one we've highlighted previously with the ongoing reduction to the historic commitments. Initial indications indicate that while the historic commitments has again reduced by 20% because of the way some of the historic costs and capital contributions have unwound, that will be sufficient to meet those commitments over the course of 23-24, but that's something we continue to watch. Obviously, the ongoing responsibilities under that block shows a 2% increase. Again, that needs to be set against the sort of pay and price pressures we're looking at the moment. Frustratingly as ever, there is no additional early years information at this point. And And the timetable for, the processes I've outlined previously is sort of copied and replicated at Appendix C. Appendix A represents, it's a national funding formula, sorry, it's an ESFA table showing in the first 4 columns the 23-24 figures, and then I've essentially attached the 22-23 unit values and how much money was being distributed nationally by reference to that to the right, just for information. We've, historically talked about, the basic entitlement, the OPU, distributing 3/4 of pupil funding, and again, there it is demonstrated 75.5% proposed for this year. We've then translated that into what it could potentially mean for Northumberland for 23-24. Important as ever to sort of share this information as soon as possible, so schools can begin making sort of informed sort of budgeting decisions on that basis. When we've talked about 2.4% increases, overall 2% increases in funding, I know the movement columns, column F and column G, look slightly higher than that in some cases, most notably in relation to deprivation, in terms of the free school meal forever 6 for any child that's qualified for free school meals at any point in the last 6 years. The reason those figures look higher than that, it's essentially because they've had school supplementary grant elements rolled in that was distributed last year. So those figures for the national funding formula for 23-24 and potential figures for Northumberland in column E are in fact correct if we were to go directly to national funding formula. One other important element to highlight is the fact that the minimum funding guarantee that guarantees a basic level of per pupil increase to all students is actually being capped by the DFE at this point for 23-24 at 0.5%. Historically, they've given us a range of between 0.5 and 2%, and wherever possible, we've capped that. We've set that level at 2% to give schools the highest possible per pupil increase. Again, subject to affordability. As part of their, I guess, move towards a more prescriptive national funding formula, the ESFA have now set that at 0.5% as the highest element. So again, challenges there. That's obviously in line with the increases also in minimum per pupil funding, which again is only 0.5% overall after adjustments for school supplementary grant. So again, anything above 0.5% would require a disapplication request and approval of the ESFA in respect of that. Excuse me. I then set the timetable. It's important, of course, highlighting the importance of school census day in this work, because all of the funding for 23-24 will be set by school census returns, school census figures as at the 6th of October. So please ensure that they're correct in all cases, maximising any free school meals applicants as you can. I'm not going to go through the timetable, but essentially, we're mirroring that in terms of the meetings. There's a deadline of the 20th of January for the submission of the final authority pro forma tool. That's why we're meeting, I think it's on the 16th of January to finally sign that off. And then, as in previous years, the end of February is the deadline for the communication of school budget shares to all maintained schools. Academies get that. I think the deadline is about a month later via the ESFA, of course. Okay. I'm going to stop for breath at that point. Any questions, any queries, any observations?
Colin, Bruce, can I come in just with a question for Bruce?
Indeed.
If I may. Thanks for that, Bruce. And we had a brief email exchange, and you flagged that the minimum per pupil funding was a lower increase. What is your reading of that? Because that seems to us and schools that get a top up because they're below the minimum, there's a kind of a kind of maybe an unintended penalising and a reverting back to a disparity that we understood the NFF was trying to address. And you know, is that your reading of it, and is it something that we should be trying to push back on? And how many schools in Northumberland are likely to be affected?
I think essentially when the minimum per pupil funding introduced, it you know, using some headline figures which had been, you know, talked about by politicians, national politicians in relation to that. I think what it did was provide a greater degree of per pupil increase for those schools than was the case for those schools who were essentially just getting the formula value increases. But that's certainly been equalised, and probably more than equalised, by lower increases over the last couple of years, Graham. I think almost some of them, I think it's almost part of the ESFA message in terms of around it's difficult because we're not talking about, we haven't specifically spoken about some of the significant pay and price pressures that are facing schools this year. And I think some of the messages I've picked up has been, you know, we acknowledge there's a gap. There's no additional funding at this point. And instead, I've been in ESFA seminars where they've made references to school balances. The problem with using school balances to fill you know, to fill gaps in budgets is you can only use it once, and invariably the costs are recurring. So I think, in short, the specifics around the minimum per pupil funding, I think there's a little bit of pushback, that both in terms of those general levels and in terms of the overall levels of balances held. I'd be surprised if, I don't know, I've challenged the SFA around the figures because essentially we're talking about between 2 and 2.4% increases overall, even, you know, and even that's excessively above the 0.5%. And we're all aware of, you know, the sort of teaching pay, support staff pay pressures coming in at somewhere between 5.6 and up to 10%, depending on the specific group. There is clearly a gap. I've said that in the SFA seminars. I've said that some of the school resource management advisor meetings I've been at. So when we're asking schools to go away and balance their budgets, it's increasingly challenging. The key thing you need is information in advance about this, but we're not getting any.
No, in some respects, I was surprised that the F40 response didn't pick up on that specific aspect. They talked about the broader MFG, but not the minimum per pupil. What was your take on that?
Well, I think essentially, I think that's something the F40 will be sort of looking at subsequently, because it will be affecting an awful lot of members, and I think there will be additional representations made between now and the end of the year in relation to that, Graham. I'd be amazed if there wasn't, frankly, and clearly, you know, we'll share any of that with you.
Yeah, just very broadly, do you have a sense as to the numbers of schools across Northumberland that have the top up to get up to that minimum per pupil funding level?
I recall, and I'm going to go off slightly, I think it's somewhere of around 30 schools. So, you know, it's not an insignificant number. And clearly, you know, Abby and her team will be working with, you know, maintain schools in Northumberland in relation to that, and I'm sure Academies will be as well. I'll, again, if you indulge me for a couple of moments, I will confirm that. But that's what I recall the figures were last year.
No, just the indicative was enough. I just sense that there might be something here to lobby on in due course, maybe as a forum, as a county, maybe as part of the F40. But anyway, appreciate you responding to the questions now. Thank you.
Graham, I was talking to, it's Colin in case you can't see me. I was talking to Bruce before the meeting, and I was making the point that in many ways, you know, what we're being presented with this morning is the least of our problems. It's this growing uncertainty in the background about money generally, where we are, you know, in the new scheme of things, because things changed hugely when the new government came in. We don't know even what the reaction is to the schools bill and the Sen Green paper. I mean, we've got to wait on that. I mean, I think I'm right in saying we don't even know what the specific responsibilities are of at least one of the new political team in the DFE. So there is an awful lot in the background that's going to influence all of this. In terms of your question about the F40, I think the F40 were probably constrained a bit. This is my feeling, by the fact that it was a very specific consultation, and knowing the F40, I doubt very much whether they'll feel that's the end of the matter. They will, I'm sure, come out with something which tries to take into account all of the other background changes and issues that are developing. And I think they're probably our best spokespeople at the moment. But clearly, as you suggest, we may have to make our own representations too. That's, yeah, I think that's probably where we are at the moment. And Bruce, you suggested going forward that we should have one or two finance committee meetings.
Yes, I think it would be sensible to put a formula funding committee in ahead of the next, sort of 2 to 3 weeks in advance of the next schools forum, which is scheduled for November.
Right.
Again, I know Ben's on the call today, and I've sort of dropped Ben a line to that effect this morning. I think that's certainly required. Okay.
I'd like to suggest we haven't got a fixed committee for that, have we? The last couple of times, we've opened it to everybody. I'd like to do the same again, but I would particularly like Graham Atkins, Graham Wilkins, and Ben to be part of that. I'm sorry to pick you out individually, but I think you have perspectives which would be immediately very helpful there. And can I suggest, Bruce, that we open the invitation as well to any other members of the forum who feel that they would like to come and contribute? Will you work on dates?
I will. I'm again looking now. If the next meeting of school forum is the 16th of November, if I came back three weeks from that, it would take us into half term. So instead, I would propose Wednesday, the 2nd of November, which still gives us a week subsequent before, and we probably, you again use this sort of Wednesday morning slot if that was helpful to people.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Colin, I just come in with one question about, obviously, when we're talking about budget. Support staff. Now, obviously, they were offered 1,925, which went out to consultation, and obviously that consultation ended a couple of days ago. So, what budget have we put in for this? This amount of money, because obviously there's the ongoing cost of obviously pension, national insurance, and everything on that amount of money.
Yeah. If I'm going to square off one question first, just from Graham, 23 schools benefited from minimum pupil funding during the current year. Graham, I think Chris, in relation to the potential sort of pay costs, Christina has got a hand up. If I'm Colin, I don't know if you can see that.
Yes, I can. Go ahead, Christina.
Thank you. Graham, the consultation hasn't closed. There are 3 trade unions who are part of the consultation, one being Unite, one being Unison, and one being GMB. Only Unison have returned an outcome. We need to wait for both Unite and GMB to return an outcome. So we won't know until probably closer to the end of October about whether or not that pay award will be accepted by the majority of members or declined by the majority of members or not. So it's still not yet confirmed.
Well, my unit is obviously Unison, so obviously that's why I knew the ballot had closed, right?
Yeah. So all 3 unions have to collectively agree or disagree, but there has to be a majority over the 3 unions for the ballot to carry. Okay, in terms of budget costs, I don't know whether Abby wants to come in on that bit.
Yes, we've been doing some work just over the last week looking at the impact of the local government pay award and the teachers pay award. And for maintained schools, we'd obviously built in estimates for a pay award for this year. in line with what the council had also built into its own budget, and what we were expecting back when we set the budgets around about December. I've started looking at the factors December last year. Obviously, the pay award has exceeded, way exceeded the estimates that we've built into school budgets. The impact just of the pay award itself on 22-23 will be around 2 million. So that's just to maintain schools, and it is more heavily weighted towards the local government staff, because a lot of those are at the lower end of the pay bands where the higher increases are. So it's going to be around 2 million to schools in 22-23. That's only giving you a 7-month impact of the teachers' pay award. So it rises again for 23-24, but at the moment 23-24 is unknown, because we are hoping and praying that we're going to get some more additional funding to meet those costs. But I think it's highly unlikely we will in 22-23. So it is going to take a big hit on our reserves. We've looked at the maintain school balances, and we predict it's going to push sort of around 5-6 schools into a deficit that were previously. But obviously every school's taken a hit with these pay awards. Every school's going to be not necessarily running with an in-year deficit, but certainly a big impact because we have so many small schools.
It is really, I'm trying to speak for everybody here, a hugely volatile background against which we've got to consider all of this. And fortunately, we're stuck with that. But every day, every week, I hope, Bruce, that we will get more information and more rumours that might be helpful. And by the 2nd of November, let's hope that things have just moved forward a little bit in terms of clarification. Incidentally, I won't make that meeting. I'm very sorry. I'm going to be in Singapore, but I will think of you.
Just one other thing about obviously this pay award. Academies, my trust, they run from their academic year runs from obviously 1st of September, and our budget runs from 1st of September, and the award is backdated to April. So obviously it's gone into last year's money. So which is going to be quite a problem for academies, those who actually operate from the 1st of September to the 31st of August each year.
There's an interesting question there, Graham, and I'm certainly not putting you on the spot, but in terms of anything, what academies accrued in respect of a potential pay award, and then what the actual final outcomes done, just to show, no matter how meticulously you plan, you can be broadsided sometimes.
Yeah. Okay. Do we have any further questions for Bruce? Just acknowledging, as I said, it's a hugely volatile situation that we're within, and for much of this we're just going to have to wait upon events. Any further questions on the NFF?
I mean, just picking up on your comments there, there is an element about watching this space, but I think inevitably as well, it's almost about planning for the worst and keeping fingers crossed that something improves beyond that.
Okay, Bruce, just finally very quickly, your Appendix C refers to various deadlines for disapplication requests. Is that all under your control? You have the information you need?
We're not anticipating making any disapplication requests at this point. As I say, the 18th of November is the key deadline in relation to that. The 10th of October is an early one. We don't anticipate any exclusions. We've embraced sparsity factor and we've used it. We don't want to disapply it at any point. But we will bear that in mind. The 18th of November is essentially the final one.
Okay, and we meet again on the 16th of November in any event?
We do, yes.
Yeah. Okay, smashing. Can we close that bit of the agenda then and move on to item 7, which is just, I think, a matter of report, work programme and meeting dates. Any comments on that?
No, it's simply a question of ensuring that all members have those dates in their diary. We've got the dates in for the rest of the academic year now, and again, we'll hopefully have a sort of extension into 23-24 available soon. Yeah,
all I would say in terms of that is that, again, given the kind of volatile situation that we're in, the more attendance we can have at all of those meetings, the better, to get the broadest agreement we can. Okay.
Chair, just before you go on, obviously the High Needs Committee. I mean, last night at the chairs and vice chairs briefing, David was obviously giving and Mike as well were giving information. I think this should be shared by the High Needs Committee and then onto forum. I don't know if you want to come in, David, and just give a quick highlight what was said last night.
David?
We're just trying to highlight, obviously, some of the pressures that are within the system, schools and central teams revolving in and around SEND, and just the continued commitment to try and make sure that as much of the high needs block as possible is directed into mainstream schools in order to meet the needs of learners as close to home as possible. I mean, Forum have been quite instrumental last year in terms of formulating and agreeing on a number of financial procedures to do exactly that, get more money into mainstream schools. But there's just never been a higher degree of pressure. The capacity at our special schools is very limited. It has been for a while now, but really limited, and therefore meeting need for children with special educational needs more than ever will fall upon mainstream schools, and it's about how we can work together collectively to support that. There's a whole host of details which there's probably not time for now, but if there is a high needs committee meeting, more than happy to give the update. And it's not an update from what I'm doing personally or even the central teams. It's a general across the piece update, and lots of feedback from a number of schools and how they're managing and what actions are being put in place.
Graham, when's your next meeting of the high needs?
We don't currently have anything in the diary. I just wondered whether it was appropriate to bring any presentation maybe to the full forum on the 16th. It's only 6 weeks away.
Yeah.
It depends how full that agenda is going to be. It could be useful, could be a useful adjunct to that agenda.
SEN tends to be a feature of that meeting in November anyway.
Okay.
We'll have a discussion and see if that will work.
Well, my suggestion is that we should, even though that might be an extended meeting, it would be good to have that as additional background. But I'll leave you to discuss that with Graham and Audrey and David.
I would say very clearly the information that David and gave last night should be really shared with the whole forum, because it went out obviously chairs and vice chair, and there's some very good in, and I think Sue Olsen is also involved now in some of this SEND work as well.
Okay, I think that's a clear steer, Bruce.
Okay. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thanks, Graham. Thanks, Colin.
Okay, any other business? I have no notice of any other business. Anything anyone particularly wants to raise?
Colin, I just wondered whether it was appropriate to raise the sort of potential situation in terms of our potential quest for a replacement, dare I say.
Yeah, gosh, I'm forgetting all about this. I wrote to Bruce towards the end of the holidays and said that I really felt that my term of office should come to a close, and I wanted to give as much notice as possible. So my plan is that if you want me for chair, I will continue for the rest of this year until next school holidays. But I will resign at the end of this academic year. So you will in September be looking for a new chair for the schools forum. Hope that gives you enough time to think about it. Gosh, I could wax lyrical. I thought when I took over that by this time, we'd have the national funding formula. All we'd be talking about was, fantastic settlements on SEND, and that would be it. How wrong can you be? There will be continuing lots to talk about within Schools Forum. It needs an active and committed chair, but I leave that with you. Thanks, Bruce.
Thank you, Colin. Audrey?
I think it would just be appropriate to say that the team more broadly, Colin, very much appreciate the work that you've done and definitely the commitment to the end of this academic year. But we'll work with you and we'll work with the forum to find ourselves a new chair going forward. You know, at this point, nobody put their screens off and try and avoid the gaze that will come across the screen, but to just recognize and say huge thanks to you, Colin, and appreciate definitely being given a period of notice in which to get that recruitment underway, and we will definitely get someone who can sit alongside you for a short while. I think that would be our aim, and then we've got a lovely smooth handover. But thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. Well, thank you, everybody, and that's the end of the meeting. And see you on the 16th of November. And I'll miss the finance meeting, but I'm sure that will go well. Take care.
Okay, thank you, Colin.
Bye.